Welcome to the Plant Fit Summit, bringing you the best in plant-based health and fitness. This is Luke and Toby, and today we have Ocean Robbins. Ocean is the CEO of the Food Revolution Network. He's a speaker, author, and adjunct professor for Chapman University. Today, we chat with Ocean about why more and more people are suffering from chronic disease and the solutions to take charge of one's own health. We start the conversation with Ocean sharing about why he decided to write his latest book, The 31-Day Food Revolution. Enjoy the presentation.
Well, for so many people, the biggest problem we face isn't knowing what to do, it's actually doing what we know. If all that was needed was for us to know that we need to eat more vegetables and less sugar and processed junk, we would not have an obesity epidemic, we would not have a diabetes epidemic in America right now. But unfortunately, a lot of us don't know how to put what we know into action, and there are a couple big reasons for that. One is there is a great deal of confusion out there. 95% of the American public actually tries to make healthy choices, at least some of the time. But only 25% of the American public actually feels confident about knowing what those healthy choices are. So there's a lot of misinformation and confusion that has people paralyzed. Analysis paralysis. We have over 10,000 studies published in peer-reviewed medical journals that tell us a heck of a lot about food and health, but for some reason, we've got a systemic environment in which people think it's confusing. Serious researchers, however, do not. We know conclusively that we need to eat less sugar and processed junk, more whole plant foods, less animal products, especially from factory farms, and we can reap tremendous benefits just by making those simple changes. So I wanted to distill it down to make it simple and clear and easy for people. And I wanted to focus on action because at the end of the day, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, they don't care a heck of a lot how much you know, how many summits you attend, how many books you read, but they do care what you do and what you eat and how you live. So my interest is in putting the power in your hands where it belongs to make the choices that are truly in your best interest. So there are 31 chapters in 31-Day Food Revolution, and every one of them ends with simple action steps you can take to apply what you just learned and get results.
Yeah, and I know there's also a lot of research that went into the book, obviously, and you've covered the development of the food industry as a whole and obviously our health for so many years. Maybe can you share some of the kind of the alarming trends that you've seen over the recent decades or even years that you've seen in our population?
Well, I directed a nonprofit for 20 years, and I traveled the globe working with leaders in over 65 countries. And as I traveled around the world and worked with people all over the planet, I kept seeing that the American way of growing food, agrochemicals, pesticides, GMOs, fertilizers, was spreading around the world. And as that was happening, we were also spreading the American way of marketing and processing food with KFC and McDonald's and Baskin Robbins, which my grandfather founded. These were spreading around the world. And as this was happening, waistlines were expanding and hospitals were filling up and countries were getting diseases that were becoming widespread that had been unheard of just a few generations ago. And so that's part of what inspired me and mobilized me to focus on food. After 20 years working with leaders globally, I decided to focus on food and launch Food Revolution Network with my dad and now colleague, best-selling author John Robbins. And, those trends have continued, sadly, in places like China with 1.2 billion people, where consumption of animal products and sugar and processed foods is continuing to rise, or India, which is still almost half vegetarian. But there are a lot of people there who have been moved towards a more so-called Western diet, and in the process, sicknesses are spreading. And, I want to kind of say to the world, please don't follow us. We know where this leads. My country, the United States, medical treatment is 19% of our entire gross domestic product. It's almost double any other country on earth. We spend more than anybody by far per capita, and yet we don't have the best health outcomes. And in fact, life expectancy is going down. Young people being born today, first generation in history to have a lower life expectancy than their parents because rates of obesity continue to skyrocket. More than 2/3 of us are now overweight or obese, probably about 70% right now. It's killing us. And the good news is we can do something about it. So I've traveled the globe. I've seen this epidemic that is being fueled by our knives and forks, but I've also seen we can turn it around. And that's really, really the good news. You know, there are so many problems in the world right now that can feel overwhelming, unconfrontable. Sometimes we almost just want to bury our head in the sand or ignore them because they feel so beyond our control. But when it comes to food, you really do have an enormous power. You know, you cast a vote with your knife and fork, with every bite you take and every dollar you spend. You're voting for the future you want, and you're voting for the world you want. And so I say, let's make it a conscious vote. Let's make it a conscious choice so we can put the power of our everyday habits into action to get results so that we can thrive and love our lives and build a healthier world while we're at it.
Yeah, before we dive into those steps and what we can do, you mentioned already that there's a link between the food that we eat and obviously all kinds of diseases. Maybe you can share a bit about which food are linked to which kind of diseases and where are the dangers that people can look out for.
Well, the fascinating thing is that the same dietary pattern that helps reverse heart disease, Dr. Dean Ornish pioneered research starting, decades ago, which proved that the Ornish program could not just prevent, but actually reverse 80% of cardiovascular blockage simply through eating a whole foods, predominantly plant-based diet, and also practicing stress reduction, getting exercise, and building loving, positive social connections. That same diet turns out to also be effective in reversing or certainly preventing prostate cancer. It's also helpful in preventing breast cancer. It's also helpful in fighting Alzheimer's and dementia. There are subtle tweaks, of course, with some of these things. Some things respond better to lower fat, some may be a little bit better to higher fat in terms of macronutrients, but the overall picture is so clear that we need to eat less processed junk, less animal products, and more whole plant foods. And you actually find that it helps everything. It's like putting the right kind of fuel in your car. Or put it another way, if you drive your car into a brick wall, your death certificate might say that the cause of death was impalement by brick wall. But and I know that in reality, the cause of death was bad driving. And in the same way, if you die of what we call heart disease or cancer or type 2 diabetes or even dementia, the death certificate's going to say that the disease killed you. And medicine would like to focus on how to fight the disease. But I'm saying that actually it was your diet and lifestyle that created the conditions out of which that or one of the other major diseases of our times was predictable. If you eat the standard American diet, you're going to get the standard American diseases and you're going to die the standard American death. And so I'm saying something else is possible and we can turn it all around. And the studies are overwhelming. I mean, there are people who eat greens, the most greens, according to researchers at Rush University in Chicago in one long-term study, they had 11 more years of healthy brain function. 11 years before they were likely to contract Alzheimer's or dementia just from eating greens regularly. Mushrooms. I mean, women who ate mushrooms in another study of 2,000 Chinese women over many years, they had all had breast cancer previously. The women who consumed button mushrooms or other mushrooms daily had a 64% drop in chance of death from breast cancer just from eating mushrooms daily. If those same women also drank green tea daily, their risk dropped by 89%. These are stunning statistics. We could prevent or reverse so many cases of breast cancer and Alzheimer's, also heart disease and all these other diseases. And it really is fundamentally the same dietary pattern. I mean, yes, turmeric is an amazing spice that is particularly good for bringing down inflammation, which has all kinds of compounding benefits on the body. Certain greens are particularly good for getting you certain vitamins and minerals. But the overall pattern is so clear. You don't need to, sit down with in a lab in order to figure out what to eat. You just need to eat real, wholesome, healthy foods. And for the most part, you're going to saturate your body with the micronutrients you need to thrive. One of the top nutrients that most people are deficient in is fiber. Less than 5% of the U.S. population gets enough. Let me be really clear. There is no fiber in any animal products, none whatsoever. But there is fiber in all whole plant foods. And there's no fiber in bottled oils. There's very little in white flour or white sugar. But again, whole plant foods have a lot. And fiber isn't just good for keeping you regular. That's what people think about it for, and that's awfully nice. But it's also good for feeding the good bacteria in your gut. they love fiber. And if you want to nurture those good guys in your gut so that they can help you digest your food and produce the neurotransmitters that keep your brain happy and healthy, then eating fiber, and particularly certain kinds of fiber that are called prebiotics, they really optimally feed the good guys, is fabulous for your well-being.
Sure, and I understand that fiber also helps with the whole detoxification process. Speaking of toxins now, what are some major toxins that are present in our food system?
There are so many toxins in our food system right now that are points of concern. I mean, number one, we have over 1,400 chemical additives, flavorings, colorings, preservatives that are all made in labs that are in our food supply right now. And most of them have never been tested for their long-term health impact on human beings. You know, so sometimes people talk about detoxing and they ask me, do I like infrared saunas or chelation or high doses of vitamin C? And, you know, some of those things may have benefit, intermittent fasting. Some of those things may have benefit. But the most important thing is to stop bringing the toxins in the first place. Otherwise, it's like, what kind of mop do you like for getting the mud off your floor? Well, it hardly matters if you're stomping around with muddy boots all day long. So the first step is, you know, keep the stuff out, keep the dirt outside, you know, take off those boots before you walk in the house. Keep those chemicals outside your body where they belong, not inside your body where they can do harm to you. Now, we don't know for sure which chemicals are bad, and we don't know for sure which forms of mud are bad. But you know what? I'd rather keep it out of my house. Sugar is another one that, you know, we don't think of it as a toxin, but the average American eats 55 pounds of it. The average American woman consumes her own weight in sugar every 3 years. And this added sugar is expanding our waistlines, and it's messing up with our blood sugar levels and our ability to balance and regulate insulin. And it's doing tremendous harm to our overall well-being. And it's causing us to overeat because we like the taste, and our bodies were conditioned for a good reason to like sweet things, like sweet fruits, because that means they're ripe. Unfortunately, the food industry hijacks our taste buds and convinces us that we're hungry when we're not. It's become expert in that. So bet you can't eat just one isn't just a cute marketing slogan. It's laying down the gauntlet from the food industry saying, hey, we own you, we control you, and we're going to make you do what we want, which is to eat an entire bag of our chips, right? So saying no to that stuff can help keep you clean, can help you keep your body clean. I'm also concerned about pesticides. We consume a lot of neurotoxic pesticides. Some of these chemicals were developed during World War II to kill people. We call them pesticides as if all they do is kill pests, but they actually really are biocides. They kill life, and they particularly maybe kill certain bugs, but they're not good for humans either. It's one of the reasons why cancer rates in the farm worker community are off the charts. You know, you've heard of probably the canary in the coal mine. Well, it doesn't take a coal miner to realize that if farm workers are dying in droves in the fields from pesticide exposure, it's probably not good for the rest of us to eat that stuff either. So the pesticides, the chemicals, the added sugars, these are some of the top toxins that we see. And then there are also heavy metals like arsenic. That's particularly present, I am sorry to tell you, in rice. Rice soaks in big swamps as it grows, and it has a knack for absorbing whatever arsenic is in the soil. And years of pesticide contamination, combined with some natural factors, have led to large amounts of arsenic in our soils. And rice is soaking it right up, and then it ends up with us. So Consumer Reports studied this and found that all types of rice, organic included, were affected. And so the best advice I can give you is wash your rice or soak it for 24 or 48 hours before you cook it. And honestly minimize. Like, we eat a lot more quinoa than rice now. And quinoa is pretty awesome, so I don't have any big complaints about that. But, you know, that's something to look out for. And there are other heavy metals as well. In general, they concentrate up the food chain. So fish are particularly alarming in this regard. Tuna, shark, swordfish, some of the other big fish are particularly concerning in terms of their ability, because they're at the top of very long food chains, to concentrate the heavy metals. So, you know, if you are going to eat fish, and I imagine a lot of folks on this event may not, but if you are going to eat fish, make sure it's, you know, wild salmon, sardines, herring, one of the types that is very low in mercury. And it's also a pretty darn good reason to steer clear and get your omega-3 fatty acids from algae sources if you're concerned about heavy metal contamination.
Speaking of contamination, obviously a lot of people associate eating vegetables from the field with consuming pesticides. So, and you suggest at the same, like kind of playing devil's advocate here, but if you suggest to eat more vegetables, doesn't that mean we're going to eat more or consume more of those pesticides?
Here's the thing to remember. There are a lot of studies that have been done that have found conclusive evidence that people who eat more vegetables and more whole plant foods live longer and healthier. Most of those studies have been done on people who were eating conventionally grown produce. They weren't going for organic, and they did pretty darn well. So I think it's possible that had they been eating organically grown produce, they would have done even better. But the bottom line is that we don't have to go organic to reap tremendous benefits. And I say if you're choosing between organic donut and non-organic kale, go for the kale every time, or the win. No question about it. And for those who can afford it and who can choose to do what's optimal, organic probably is safer for humans. It probably contains more vitamins and minerals, and it definitely contributes to a safer environment for farm workers, for animals, and for the planet.
So in terms of organic, and I just want to kind of backtrack to what you said earlier because I found it really interesting about how pesticides were initially used for biowarfare to where it is now, and it's kind of on our food system. How did this whole process occur from biowarfare to an everyday kind of usage of pesticides on everyday food that we eat? How did that occur?
Oh my goodness. Well, starting after World War II, there was this, number one, a lot of poisons had been developed, and there was this thought to use them in agriculture. And wow, they kill bugs, not just humans. Cool, in smaller amounts. And it kind of went from there. We had a very militaristic mentality at that point, and it spread into every domain, really, from nuclear energy to use of pesticides in our food production. And we've applied a military kind of model to food where we're practically at war with the earth, and we're certainly at war with bugs, and we try to conform and bend nature to our will. Unfortunately, for humans, Mother Nature bats last, and what we find is that in the long run, nature balances itself. So, when we use a certain pesticide for too long, eventually bugs develop resistance. And that's what we're seeing with GMOs, where crops have been genetically engineered to be resistant to herbicides. So we then spray the glyphosate, which is the most popular one, on large amounts of cropland: corn, soy, canola, sugar beets, alfalfa, and cotton. And the weeds die, but the plants don't, which sounds lovely until you realize that, number one, we're spraying our food crops with weed killer that is a probable carcinogen, and that is known endocrine disruptor, and that's an antibiotic, by the way, so it can kill bacteria. It's been patented as an antibiotic. It can kill bacteria, including in your digestive tract. And so we're spraying that on our food, and weeds are developing resistance. So now we need more and more glyphosate on the croplands in order to kill the weeds because they're getting resistant to it, just like we have antibiotic-resistant bacteria coming out of our factory farms. And so the result of that is that it takes more and more and more, which now we're spraying an extra 200 million pounds of glyphosate on American cropland every year, just in the U.S. alone, because of the GMO crop situation. And, it's kind of concerning because what's next with these super weeds developing resistance? Well, the next thing they're trying is a new line of herbicides like 2,4-D, which is one of the active ingredients in Agent Orange. It's probably even more toxic than glyphosate. And now we have, 2,4-D or Agent Orange corn, 2,4-D resistant corn that can be sprayed with this stuff directly and survive. And it's pretty concerning. But the good news is you don't have to be a part of that system. You can say no, and you can say yes to healthier food and a healthier life for you and your family. When you choose to avoid GMOs, the best ways are, number one, go organic, because all organic food is non-GMO. Number two, if that's too expensive or unwieldy for you, go certified non-GMO. And number three, you can look for the specific crops that tend to be genetically engineered. I'm talking corn, soy, canola, cotton, which is used in cottonseed oil, and sugar beets, which are about half the sugar supply if it's not cane sugar. Those are about 98% of the GMO crops. There's also a bit of zucchini and summer squash and Hawaiian papaya. If you steer clear of those things, unless they're organic or certified non-GMO, then you will yourself be pretty much, GMO free.
You also mentioned in your book, so it's like in four parts. The second part is nourish, which I found was very fascinating, because you also allude to one fact that people tend to trust their doctors for recommendations in terms of dietary, even in dietary habits. So, and you talk about the education of doctors, because we got to know who we trust when we ask, right? So what can you share about your research in that regard?
Well, the average physician gets less than 19 hours of nutritional education in all their years of medical school, which is kind of sad when you think about it, because we go to our doctors to help us be healthy, and what they're doing is, I hate to say it, but it's kind of influenced by financial dynamics. Like, for example, if doctors were reimbursed for prescribing broccoli, like they're reimbursed for prescribing chemo, I think we'd see more broccoli eaten, and I think we'd see less cancer deaths. It's the reality. And it's not that people go into medical school because they want to profit at public health expense. Of course, a lot of selfless, wonderful people go into medicine because they want to help people. But the system itself is kind of tilted to focus on high-tech interventions rather than low-tech proven solutions that actually work. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But unfortunately, we're spending a ton of money, our treasure, and even our lives trying to cure diseases that never, ever had to happen in the first place. And medicine has major responsibility for that, because, the National Board of Medical Examiners, which is the body that essentially creates the tests that, medical school graduates have to pass in order to become physicians in the United States. The National Board of Medical Examiners has virtually no questions on the tests about nutrition. There are, out of 140 medical schools in the U.S., only 4 of them have a single dedicated staff member focused on nutrition or a nutrition department. Less than a third of them have a single required course in nutrition in all years of medical school. So it's typical for a physician to graduate medical school and go into practice without knowing anything about food and health. And yet we all know food is the foundation of health. And if we don't eat right, it's also the foundation of disease. So if you want medical guidance from somebody who knows about food, well, there are some resources out there. There are some more alternative practitioners. Obviously, it depends what insurance system you have, and, you can ask around. But you may need your nutritional education from other places, like this summit, like the kind of people that are speaking here, because they can really help guide you on your path and help steer you and help you get informed. The reality is, if you consider that the average doctor got less than 19 hours of nutritional education, you can learn more in one online telesummit than probably they ever learned in all of medical school. And so the bad news is they can't guide you for the most part on food. The good news is you don't need them to, because it doesn't take some fancy doctor to really know the basics of eating more whole foods, plant-based diet, moving away from the processed junk, moving away from the animal products, and reaping tremendous benefits from doing so. So, really, I think what I want to see is, if a doctor wants to prescribe drugs, they send you to the pharmacy. But if they want to prescribe healthy food, there's actually nowhere to send you. They're kind of like, well, good luck with that, So that's why it's up to each of us to get informed and get empowered, so we're not at the mercy of a medical system that acts like food didn't matter, or a food system that acts like health didn't matter.
In recent years, there's a sudden growth in superfoods. So with that question in mind, does that mean that we need to just focus on a whole food plant-based diet? Are superfoods valid to get a nutrient-rich diet?
So yeah, thanks for asking. So part 1 of 31 Day Food Revolution, my brand new book, focuses, actually it's not just my book anymore, it's now your book as well. I wrote this for you. It focuses on detoxifying and getting rid of the bad stuff, and we also look at pots and pans and water and plastics and other places that contamination enters our bodies. And part 2 focuses on nourish. It's how to say yes to the good things, the real superfoods that help you thrive. So what is a superfood? Some people think it means some elite food that maybe costs $30 a pound, and it's only for the super rich. I say superfoods are super when they can do the most good for the most people, which by definition means they're widely accessible and available and empowering. So to me, the real superfoods on the planet right now are things like cabbage and carrots and onions and button mushrooms and legumes. Legumes are a tremendous superfood. Dan Buettner, when he was studying the blue zones, the places in the world where people live the longest and healthiest lives, he identified 6 places where they have dramatically higher life expectancy than other people in the same regions even as them. And he looked at what they have in common and what they do differently. And in all of the blue zones, they eat between 0 and 5 or 10% of their calories from animal products. In the United States, we're at 34%. So that's a massive drop. And we could argue till the cows come home, literally, about whether it's best to do 0 or 5 or 10. But there is pretty much no argument. I would say the jury is in on this one, that between 0 and 10 is better than 34 for the vast majority of people, period. And in the blue zones, they don't eat a significant amount of sugar or processed foods, very, very little traditionally. And they eat a lot of vegetables and whole foods and a lot of legumes, interestingly enough. So legumes are the one food type that is particularly in all 6 of the blue zones. And there are countless studies showing us that legumes can be really healthy, and they're not crazy expensive. Some people think of them as a poor man's food, as if the fact that they're affordable somehow made them less special or less wonderful. I think it makes them better, because it means you don't have to spend a fortune to eat good, wholesome, healthy food. Now, let's suppose you get gas, right? Some people do, right? They're not called the musical fruit for nothing. So let's be real about this. That's a concern. A lot of that issue can be addressed if you soak your legumes for 48 hours, changing the water every 12 hours before you cook them. And can go a long way towards helping you get rid of the compounds, the offending compounds that bubble up at the top of your water while you're soaking them, and those can be what's giving you gas.
So in terms of legumes, I understand that, for example, Okinawa, Japan, soy is a big component over there. But many people worry about soy because some people say that 90 to 95% of soy is GMO. So is there a concern to consume soy at all?
Well, I'm concerned about GMO soy because it's been sprayed with Roundup, which has glyphosate in it. That means it's got the ability to kill bacteria in the gut. That means it's an endocrine disruptor, and it's a probable carcinogen. I would rather not take that into my body. And it may also contain Bt in every cell of the plant, because a lot of genetically engineered crops have been engineered for that trait, so that certain bugs, when they take a bite, their stomach split open and they die. And this is literally, they're literally pesticide factories. They're actually registered with the EPA, these crops are, as pesticides. So that concerns me, and I would rather not eat that. But you don't have to. Most of the GMO soy is actually being fed to livestock, as ditto with corn, by the way. So if you're concerned about GMOs, the number one thing you can do is to avoid all factory farmed animal products, because those are fed tremendous amounts of our corn and soy crop that's all genetically engineered. But for your own health, go organic or certified non-GMO with the soy. It actually isn't that hard. Some restaurants, it may be more difficult because you don't control, obviously, what ingredients they buy. But as a consumer, a surprisingly large amount of the soy on the market is non-GMO or organic, whether it's edamame or tofu or soy milk or tempeh, because a lot of the consumers who are choosing soy care about that. There are a lot of studies on soy and its impact on human health, and for the most part, it's quite favorable. Not only is it a very high protein food, but it's high in certain types of protein and other flavonoids and beneficial compounds, phytonutrients that are proven to help fight breast cancer, to balance your hormones. There's some fallacies out there which say that soy, causes erectile dysfunction or lower sperm count for men. It is hogwash. Not true at all. If you're concerned about getting it up for the guys out there, then you want to have good blood flow through your arteries and through your body to every organ in your body. And that's true for women too, by the way. If you want more pleasure and vitality in your life, then blood flow is critical. And soy is very healthy for your heart. And so are whole plant foods in general. And so, that's the best advice I could give you. Now, that doesn't mean it's right for everyone. Just because studies show that a lot of people do better on legumes or with soy doesn't mean that everyone does. So listen to your body. You are the only expert on the planet on your life experience. So in 31 Day Food Revolution, I actually have a whole section on how you can listen to the wisdom that's in your body, because you're the only one who knows what you experience, what you feel, what your ethics are, what your values are, your metabolism, your life history, how you sleep, how you function, how active you are. All of these things affect what you should eat and how much you should eat. So at the end of the day, you got to listen, you got to learn, you got to pay attention and clear away the noise, because a lot of us, unfortunately, have been so hooked on junk food that we can't tell the difference between our native desires and the compulsions of addiction. But there is a difference. And at the end of the day, it's very important to learn to know the difference, because if you can actually be drawn to loving foods that love you back, then you're setting yourself up for a lifetime of success on a healthy eating path. You shouldn't need to ultimately read books and fill out charts to figure out what to eat. Eventually, you want it to become second nature, so you just naturally do the right thing day in and day out. But sometimes it takes some time and energy to get set up for success. Back to soy, I think for most people it's beneficial, but avoid textured vegetable protein, soy protein isolate, a lot of the extracted, highly processed compounds that come out of soy, because they're processed foods. And here's a general rule of thumb. It may not be true for everything, but it's pretty darn close. The more processed something is, the less healthy it is for you. And so, nature is amazing. And it creates this symphony of compounds that all interact together in whole foods. When we extract those, whether it's soy protein isolate, whether it's bottled oils, whether it's processed sugar or flour or chemicals, we are separating the instruments out. And no trumpet sounds very good by itself, not compared to how it sounds when it's part of a beautiful band that's all playing together. So I want to invite you, encourage you, challenge you to make healthy eating a symphony by basing your diet around whole foods. And soy is one of them where it really, really matters. And we do a lot of extracting and separating, but want to bring it back together. So edamame is probably the best, or pressure cooked soybeans that have been soaked for 48 hours first. But, soy milks and tofu and tempeh are relatively non-processed. Natto is pretty darn healthy. Some people hate the taste and smell, but if you like it, awesome.
Yeah, you kept alluding to how certain chemicals affect the functioning of our gut. Maybe you can know there's a chapter in your book as well on gut health in general. Maybe you can talk a bit about the importance of our gut for our overall health and what we can do to improve it.
Sure, absolutely. Well, your gut is so important. It's like a second brain. And as I was sharing earlier, it's where neurotransmitters are developed that actually make your brain happy, peaceful, comfortable, relaxed. And when people talk about thinking from your gut or trusting your gut, it's not just a metaphor. It's very practical, and it's very real, and it's very powerful. So listen to your gut, trust it, let it guide you on your path, and that'll help you really powerfully. So how do you cultivate a healthy gut? Well, let me be really clear that there's a lot of bacteria in your gut, and they like to eat, and they like to eat different things. Generally speaking, to put it really simply, the good guys like whole plant foods, and they like fiber. The bad guys, the bacteria that are unhealthy, that get out of balance, like sugar and processed junk and maybe animal products, which have no fiber. And there's this old Cherokee legend about there's a grandfather with his grandson, and he's saying, "My grandson, there's a battle inside me between these two wolves. One of them is jealousy and avarice and anger and fear and greed and meanness, and the other one is kind and loving and gentle and courageous and noble, and they're at war." And the grandson says, "Grandfather, which one will win?" And the grandfather said, "The same battle is taking place in you, my grandson, and the one will win, which is the one that you feed." So we get to choose. We all have different parts of us within us, and we get to choose which ones we feed, which ones we nourish. Similarly, with your bacteria, when you feed the good guys, you help to create a healthy, balanced microbiome. When you feed the bad guys, you create something very different. And if you find yourself ever in your stomach craving a certain food, I want to invite you to consider for a moment, maybe it's not you at all. Maybe it's them. And they are so connected to you. And they're like, "Give me more," right? And if you're feeding them donuts all day long, then guess who's active and fed in there that's screaming for more food? Donut lovers, right? And if you're feeding them broccoli or kale, then they're going to want that. And if you think this is crazy, I want you to know it is actually possible to crave healthy foods. Sometimes I eat kale for breakfast. It's not always my favorite, but sometimes I just love it. And that's possible for you too. Not as a thing you have to force your way through, but you can actually learn to cultivate it. One of the top ways is by nourishing the good guys in your gut that like healthy foods, by feeding it to them. So it takes a little time. It can take weeks sometimes to shift the balance. But even within as little as 2 or 3 weeks of eating a dramatically healthier diet, most people lose a lot of their cravings for the junk food and find the healthier food gets easier and easier to enjoy. So that's a big high-level principle. Now, there are specific foods we call prebiotics that are particularly potent at feeding the good guys. Some of my favorites, Jerusalem artichokes. Wow, great studies on Jerusalem artichokes and their benefits for prebiotics. Jicama, garlic, onions. These are amazing, particularly raw onions and garlic, by the way. Amazing for your digestive tract, and jicama too. Those are a few of my favorites. There are others, and then pretty much any whole plant food with fiber is going to be a positive win for your digestion. And then what about probiotics? The bacteria, the capsules, the powder, the coconut kefirs, the kombuchas, fermented foods. Yes, those can be beneficial too. Personally, I'm more partial to the fermented foods because they come with more than just the bacteria. They come with some carrier that helps the bacteria make it through. The sad reality is your stomach is super acidic and very little organisms can survive the journey down to your intestines alive. But if you can make it, and studies have found that your best chance of absorbing probiotics is if you eat them within 15 to 30 minutes before a medium to small sized meal that includes some fat. So, take a little probiotics and have a half avocado 15 minutes later. That's kind of like the dream team combo for getting them down there and having it make it through. There's no magic formula, but that seems helpful. And my personal favorite, I love Inner Echo coconut kefir. It's got, I think 50 billion microorganisms per tablespoon. Tastes just fine. It's actually a fermented coconut kefir, but it's just packed with probiotics. So you can look at the actual bacterial count, and that's a good way to gauge a good one. But most of all, you want to get your probiotics from fermented foods if you can. And I say feed the good guys with the prebiotics, because it doesn't matter how many probiotics you take if they're starved to death once they get down there,
Definitely feeding the good guys. I just want to backtrack a little bit to what you were saying about habits and addictions, because for example, someone who's watching this and gets all this knowledge, and of course maybe they may be having donuts, they may be having processed and refined foods. It's really hard to break the addiction even with the knowledge. What are the first steps? Because if they're in an environment where possibly they're in a food desert and they're addicted to that bag of chips that's staring across them, how can they start to break that process?
Well, great question. So first of all, hold yourself with a lot of love and compassion, and always remember that we live in a toxic food culture where it's become normalized to eat foods that are packed full of synthetic hormones and chemicals and antibiotics and sugars. And a lot of this, the food industry has gotten really good at marketing junk to us and convincing us that we want it. And so it's not your fault if you sometimes crave foods that aren't good for you, if you sometimes feel like you aren't in control of your food life. Many of us are literally addicted to junk foods, and we need to treat it as such and take it very seriously. 2/3 of our population is overweight or obese. This is not because people don't care how they look. If anything, our society is obsessed with how we look. It's not because people don't want to be trim and lean. Diet industry products are making a fortune off of us. But 98%, right now 105 million Americans are on a diet. 98% of those diets will fail. If people lose any weight, they'll gain it back and more within 6 months. There is very little hope for most people who are struggling on this. And I want to tell you that there is hope for you because you're here right now and you're learning and engaging. You don't have to be one of these statistics. So the top things are, if you're actually dealing with food addiction, and I have a whole chapter on this in 31 Day Food Revolution, so it's very dear to my heart. If you're dealing with food addiction, if you're high on the susceptibility scale, if you ever find yourself craving foods that aren't good for you, then you want to avoid sugar and flour in particular, because those are foods that go straight into the bloodstream, and they are like a hit. They trigger a dopamine reaction in the brain, and they're like a hit for a drug addict. An alcoholic can't have just one drink because they get going and then they want more. You've got to draw a sharp, bright line. And if you go to foodrevolution.org/food quiz, again, foodrevolution.org/food quiz, you can take the quiz developed by my dear friend Susan Pierce Thompson, which helps you clarify if you are susceptible to food addiction. And if so, she's got a program that's 55 times more effective than any other program out there, including Weight Watchers, when it comes to helping people get real results in breaking free from food addiction. So that's one great resource. But generally, if you aren't like super struggling with food addiction, or if you feel like you do have some willpower that lets you make choices that you can kind of steer the ship, then sugar and processed foods and flours are things you want to avoid, and then less animal products. And if you eat a lot of really wholesome, healthy foods, you find that your cravings go down over time because your body's getting the nutrients it needs. A lot of us are calorie overwhelmed, but we're actually nutritionally starving because we're not getting some of the basic micronutrients we need. So our body can feel hungry because it's actually not getting stuff that it needs. And the answer then isn't to eat more potato chips or scarf down that bag of cookies, although a lot of times in the short run that feels very pleasurable. But in the long run, it's to eat more of the veggies that will help you to thrive. And so we find that the healthiest, longest lived peoples in the world don't have high caloric intake. They consume 500 to 1,000 calories per day less than the average American does. Guess what? One of the benefits of lower caloric intake is saving money, as well as saving your waistline, as well as saving your life in many cases down the road.
You alluded earlier that it's so common and almost accepted to be eating junk food today. And in your book as well, you mentioned the importance of kind of the community and people you surround yourself with and their impact on your own health. Maybe you can share a bit about that, because that was really insightful.
Absolutely. There's a saying that if you want to know who you're going to be in 5 years, look at who you're spending your time with today. We tend to be profoundly influenced by the people around us. This isn't a call, by the way, to ditch your friends if they don't meet some standard of moral purity. This is a call to recognize that relationships really truly matter and they help shape who we are. And one of the benefits of becoming a healthy eater is that you also become a healthy eating leader. You actually become an advocate and a change maker in your community, and you uplift the health and the well-being of those around you unconsciously and naturally, simply by being you, simply by leading by example, simply by following the path of your own highest conscience. You actually help shift the course of your community, your family, your relationships, and your world. Not because everyone will do what you do, not because they'll eat like you do, but slowly and softly, you're normalizing something that might seem weird. And things that, when I was a kid, healthy eaters were hippies who, were super marginalized. And now healthy food has gone way more mainstream because of cultural change, because of a bunch of early adopters who stepped out and stood out and were willing to look like wackos because they wanted to eat real food. And now we see the tides of history changing, and organic food is in supermarkets all over the country and all over the world. More and more people care what they eat, where it comes from, how it was produced, how it was grown and processed, and what the heck is in it. So change is happening, and you can be a part of it. If you want to influence friends and family and loved ones, number one, always love them. Number two, don't pathologize them. Don't judge or blame them for being who they are. Martin Luther King said you have no moral authority with those who can feel your underlying contempt. When we hold contempt towards people for being who they are, we lose moral standing in the relationship. So you may not like somebody's actions, but always stay in connection. Be squared away with their soul, with who they really are, and with your love for them. If they're in your family, if they're in your life, if they're in your heart, then you obviously love something about them. Stay in relationship to that. Know that nobody wants to be sick and die, but some people don't know. And the best way to help them is to love them and support them and respect their sovereignty. And then find ways to communicate and speak up. If you want to give people a book, one of the top things you can do is you can actually put a Post-it note on there that says, hey, on page 73, I thought of you. I bet you the odds just went up tenfold that they're going to open that book. And they might just open it to page 73. Same with a DVD. Give them a DVD, say, hey, at 2316, there's a spot that made me think of you. Or if you're showing them an online summit, point to a particular interview about halfway through that made you think of them. You will stir their curiosity, I guarantee that. So these are some ways you can spread the word with love, with respect, honor people's sovereignty, recognize that they don't share your particular ethics, values, life stage, or experience, but if they're in your life, then they deserve your love and they deserve your truth. And one of the things that a lot of families can agree on is that we want an environment where everyone gets their needs met, where everyone feels loved and respected and cared about. So, my wife's family doesn't eat quite like I do. And so sometimes we get together, for Thanksgiving or something. And, we do a potluck because everyone's bringing different stuff and we aren't all eating the same way. But there's respect and care. And we can all align on, like, we want to make sure there's plenty of plant-based options. And then for the folks who want their turkey, they're going to do it pasture-raised, and we'll coexist. We'll mingle, because I think the love is the most important thing. And food is not the point of a gathering. It's a means to an end. It's a point of connection, but the goal is the connection. It's the love. It's creating memories that last a lifetime. So always remember that in all of your relationships. It's about the love that you share and the bond you form with people, and expressing appreciation, saying grace, moments of gratitude can all bring people together. I think that we live in a society where loneliness is almost epidemic in the modern world. So many people feel isolated, feel disconnected, feel the sense of separation and fundamental disconnection from the world or from a sense of belonging. And healthy food can actually be a doorway towards deeper connection. You can share food. You can create a potluck meal sharing program where, say, on Mondays I bring lunch to work and on Tuesdays you do, and you can make extra soup for the neighbors. You can have a potluck at your house and have a video watching party learning about healthy food, or watching videos like this one and sharing it with people. There are so many ways that you can be an agent of change, that you can share health and positivity and possibility. They say, the fastest doorway to a man's brain is often his stomach. And of course, it's not just men, but when we serve healthy food, it can really, it's an act of love. So let's love.
I love it. It's about appreciating each and every person, because everyone's on their own journey, and it's really focusing on our similarities rather than differences. So in terms, you mentioned earlier about change leaders in communities. I know your book is littered with stories of inspiration. Could you share some that come to mind, like any change leaders that you've kind of spoken to that have really taken their lives and taken charge of the communities and really spread change?
Sure, absolutely. Part 4 of 31 Day Food Revolution is all about transformation and how we can vote for a better world with our knives and forks. And the spoiler alert is it's a lot easier to change the world than you probably ever imagined. And actually, the biggest change agent is actually you. I mean, we can talk about the heroes of the food revolution, and there are many of them, and they inspire me greatly. But at the end of the day, it's you and me and our everyday choices that shifts the course of the food culture and the food world. If you don't want animals to be in factory farms, then don't eat meat from factory farms. If you don't want farmers to be poisoned in the field with pesticides, then don't eat, pesticide contaminated foods. If you want our kids to eat healthy food in schools, then you can contact your local school district food service department, and you can find out what they're serving the kids and how they think about it, and you can weigh in with your concern. I guarantee you very few people are doing that, which means you can have an enormous influence. You might shift the course of food future for thousands of kids with a simple phone call. So in 31 Day Food Revolution, I kind of go into all this and lay it out. What inspired me so much as I was researching it was how easy it is for so many people to change the world. And we have real examples. We asked our membership, we have 500,000 members in Food Revolution Network, and we asked our members to share their stories of change and possibility and transformation, and some of them just bring me to tears. Some are really dramatic, like Kate McGowie-Smith in Calgary, Alberta, who was suffering from serious diabetes, kidney failure. She had gone blind. She was confined to a wheelchair. She couldn't breathe without a 20-pound oxygen tank. Her doctors told her she didn't have long to live at all, and the best thing they could offer was to recommend she get a good will, because her kids were probably going to lose their mom pretty soon. She ended up unwilling to accept that diagnosis. She went on a whole foods plant-based diet. She snacked on steamed greens with seasoned vinegar 6 times a day, gave up all sugar, taught herself to cook in a wheelchair hooked up to a 20-pound oxygen tank and blind, and she got results. Within a few years, she got her sight back. She got mobile. She got able to run around. She didn't need kidney dialysis. She got off her oxygen tank. She is now a thriving health coach. She still has only 12% kidney function, but that's enough for her to function because her body is so clean and her diet is so clean and healthy. Kate told me, and this just moved me so much. She was talking about her kids, and she said, going through all this made me aware of my mortality. and I had young kids, and I didn't know how long they'd live, and certainly didn't know how long I'd live. And I'm not going to leave them much money, I don't think, when I die, but I'm going to leave them something so much more important, which is the gift of health and knowing that health is possible. Her own son lost 70 pounds, inspired by her example. Her husband lost 50 pounds, inspired by her example. This stuff ripples and it spreads, and it's made her whole family and her whole community healthier because now she's a teacher. This is just one story, but I don't know about you. Sometimes I can feel kind of mopey and, complain in my life. And then I think about Kate, blind, in a wheelchair, hooked up to a 20-pound oxygen tank, teaching herself to cook and snacking on greens with seasoned vinegar 6 times a day. And my problems look pretty darn small. So the reality is, if there's hope for Kate, there's hope for the rest of us that we can make some changes too. Pain pushes and vision pulls. And my belief is that we can have either. You can be motivated, and a lot of us are, by fear of disease, by trying to avoid suffering, but you can also be motivated by what you want, by what you're drawn towards, by your vision and your dreams for your life. And when you have that motivation, then everything changes for the better. Another person who inspires me is Ron Finley in a very different way. He's from South Central Los Angeles, in a community where you sometimes have to travel 30 miles to get an organic carrot. But he says it's easier to get crack cocaine than organic food in his community. There are, as he puts it, the drive-throughs are killing more people than the drive-bys. But in that context, Ron decided to plant an organic vegetable garden on the median out in front of his house, just for the neighborhood. Anyone could come and eat anytime they wanted to. And at first he had, homeless people that would come by in the middle of the night and looking all around, being real scared they'd be caught. They'd grab a piece of broccoli and run off like this with it, because they're stealing it kind of. And he'd shout out, "Hey man, it's all good, enjoy," and because he wanted to share it. The city had an ordinance that made that illegal. They threatened him with jail time if he didn't stop growing food in the middle of the median. He fought it in court, wound up getting the entire city of Los Angeles to change its laws so that people can grow food on medians. A short time later, his landlord tried to evict him. A big fundraising push ensued, and the Ron Finley Project raised over $500,000, and they bought the property where he lives. So now his backyard is a big garden, and it's open to the community, and people can just come on back and harvest, and he's got all kinds of amazing foods growing in there. And, Ron is one person who said no to being a victim of a toxic food culture, and he said yes to being the solution. And sometimes it's as simple as planting some vegetables.
That's a brilliant story.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. So I think just a final question. You shared a lot of harrowing statistics in where the state of health and the food system is. Where we are right now, can we actually be optimistic?
Well, you can be very optimistic because you personally have the power to be a part of the solution. Every day with your knife and fork. You can be an everyday revolutionary, or you can be complicitous in the status quo, and that choice is up to you, and you will reap the benefits or suffer the consequences of what you do with that choice. So I'm encouraging everybody to make it a conscious one. And that's, I think, the most wonderful thing in the world, because hope isn't just a noun, it's a verb. It's something that comes from what we create and how we live and how we show up, and yes, how we eat. So yes, hope is very alive because we know how to prevent and reverse the vast majority of the illnesses that are plaguing humanity. We could probably add 20 years of healthy life expectancy to our lives just by doing the right thing and eating the right foods. It's incredible what a difference it can make. And the word is spreading all over the world. People are sick of being sick. They're fed up with toxic food, and they're hungry for change. And more people are participating and engaging and learning and growing and getting informed, getting empowered, and taking action. It's why sales of organic food have been skyrocketing. Sales of natural food have been skyrocketing. Local, fair trade, farmers markets, community-supported agriculture, certified non-GMO. These things are all growing because people care, and healthy food is becoming more mainstream. So I think that's pretty awesome. We have a long, long, long way to go. But I think we're making progress, and we're reaching a tipping point. I believe that in the next 5 or 10 years, we're actually going to see a tip in the obesity epidemic starting to go in the other direction. I could be wrong, but that is my belief. And I think that you and I and all of us are going to help make that happen. Are you in?
Sure am.
100%.
100%.
Thanks so much, Ocean.
Thank you, Ocean.
All right. Well, thank you. And everybody watching, I just want to say thank you for giving the most precious gift you have, which is your time and your attention. Because when we're learning, I think that we are participating in one of the most powerful forces on the planet. So thank you for learning. Thank you for caring. And most of all, thank you for acting. And hopefully 31 Day Food Revolution can be a resource that supports and empowers you on your path. That's why I wrote it. Hopefully this event is helpful, and all that these gentlemen are doing is helpful to you on your path, because you deserve it. You deserve to know the truth, and you deserve to eat with love. So bless you.
We hope you enjoyed this presentation. We're always amazed how much there is to learn, and that's the exciting part. You never know how far this journey will take you. Luke grew up being the fat kid, suffering from health issues, and even tried to take his life. And I've lost my mom to cancer when I was only 19. But today, here we are with you and this amazing community. We're humbled and thankful, because together we can thrive and inspire those around us. And if you'd like to support our work, we want to invite you to consider owning the Summit for life. Click the button below to find out more. Thank you once again, whether you're participating in the comments, sharing the Summit online, or supporting us by owning the Summit package. You are making a difference, because the Summit just wouldn't be possible without you. This is Toby and Luke signing off, and we'll see you in the next interview.